Welcome back to the Boundary Corner podcast. I'm Curtis Wilson.
I'm Brian Siegler, buddy. We're live on a Wednesday night. How you feeling, buddy?
Back-to-back Wednesdays in the off season. We
Yeah,
don't do
yeah.
that
We
often.
we couldn't let the spring game shenanigans simmer for too long, so we had to get one going this week.
Oh no, we couldn't. Plus, you'd already watched. You were at the spring game. You watched it Sunday. You watched it Monday. Brian would likely be on his 9th to 10th watching of the spring game, trying to analyze everything that happened. If we didn't do that, man. So let me just ask this. I know you took your son down. How was the trip up and back?
Trip up and back was great. Actually, made it in like 3 hours and 10 minutes. So no traffic really either in or out. Just it was a good trip, good times. My son got there. He was hanging out with kids at the tailgate we were at. He was hanging out with kids at the tailgate next to us. So he was having a good time until we went into the stadium, and it was just a good time all around. He got to jump to Sandman for the first time, so he got the full experience, at least from a spring game perspective, right out the gate.
Full experience of a real game too, just not as much as the chaos as going up in the fall when it's 66,000 in the stadium and about 100,000 in the town when it's craziness.
Yeah, I think we probably clipped above, just above 30,000 somewhere in there. It looks like what the attendance was. I'm not sure what the exact number was. I haven't seen anyone put that out there yet, but it was a good showing. West was pretty much filled. North was pretty much filled. South was about 3/4. Then you had about a quarter to a third of East pretty stacked on that side. So it was a good crowd and just good atmosphere all around.
Yeah, but I'm thinking going back to when we went in 16. If you can remember, we sat in East, and remember they had like caution tape up in East.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't go but so far up on East. So maybe I don't know if it's a liability thing or it's just they always are constantly, those updating those seats and stuff. But maybe that's the reason East did not look as filled as West, because you sent me a picture of West, man. I mean, West was packed. West looked like a game day, with the exception of the upper right corner. Like no one was there, and that looked very awkward because you kind of look around like that's a great view spot. That's a spot we've set before. So, but I'm glad you got to go, or one of us got to go down there. I'm still talking because I'm keeping an eye on the Nets Celtics game. Mike McDaniel is going to join us just in a second here. Big Celtics fan. Mike was chatting us up while watching the game right before we came on. I just went final here. Women's softball top 15 victory at Tennessee tonight. That game was on ESPN, dude.
Yeah.
You know that?
Yeah, I pulled up the app earlier. I was like, "Oh, that's on there tonight." There we go.
Well, I turned it over for a couple innings. I just like, oh, cool. Let's see how they're doing. They're up 3-1, and I looked. I'm like, that's not ACC Network. That's not the Deuce or the U. That's full bore ESPN. So definitely big night for the ladies, getting a big win. I mean, they're marching closer and closer, not to only getting a regional posting, but potential getting a super regional in Blacksburg when the tournament starts. So that will be awesome. Brian, I'm looking at the score.
Yeah.
It's 114-105. We're under 25 seconds. Is it safe to bring him on?
I think we're good, man. I think he feels pretty comfortable about the cushion now.
All right.
Well, Reggie Miller's not out there, so I think we're going to be all right.
Oh, man. oh, man. Reggie Miller is not out there. So we are going to bring on our guest tonight from SI, from Hokie Hangover, from Sons of Saturday, the one and only hardest working man in Hokie podcast land, Mike McDaniels.
What's up, boys?
How's it going, Mike?
I know I'm making. I know I'm making my annual appearance on this podcast when I have a Boston team in the playoffs, and you guys are stalling for me in the intro. So I do appreciate that.
Last year was the Bruins.
It was the Bruins.
It was the Bruins last year.
It was. It was. No, so I appreciate it. I was locked in. So
Awesome. They're up. I see it's 9. Are we in a TV timeout or something?
yeah, they're up 7 with about 35 seconds left. So safe to bring it on.
There we
Okay.
go.
Excellent.
The blood
Well,
pressure is a little bit lower than it was when we
Man,
first
I was
jumping on the
nervous.
link here.
I was nervous.
Well, I mean, I told him I turned it on. They were down like 5 points, and then I got to talking with Brian on here right before we went on. I turned my phone off, go back and look, and it's like a 19-1 run, like by the Celtics. Like, whoop.
Yeah,
Like,
they were not playing very well in the first half. They were down 17 with 4 minutes to go in the first half, and then hit a couple shots, cut it to 10, and then it was, all Celtics in the second half. Fourth quarter was great, so pretty fired up to be up 2-0, man. The Nets are tough. Like Kyrie and Durant, tough.
Yeah,
Tough.
that's a tough first round draw for you guys.
Yeah, that's the Eastern Conference Finals matchup. Forget a first round matchup. It's crazy.
It is, but hey, you guys pulled both W's at home. What a play by Tatum on Sunday with the layup. Literally, I'm sure your heart was coming out of your chest there that night.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what made me more nervous: the fact that the Nets were up 3, I think, with like 45 seconds left of Game 1, or the fact that the Celtics were down 17 here in Game 2, and it was pretty. Somehow, Game 2 was an easier watch down the stretch, and I thought the Celtics played worse tonight. So, hey, man, I'll take it. I will take it.
Awesome. Well, Mike, we brought you on tonight. We're going to discuss a ton of stuff, the spring game, NIL, some draft stuff. But let's start right before the spring game weekend, kicks off. The big announcement from the athletic department about the NIL deals. And essentially there are 3 big partners with Virginia Tech. You've got Commonwealth NIL, founded by Nick Rush and Forrest Rush. You got Hot Route Marketing, Kelly Woolwine taking care of that, and then Triumph NIL, the one we definitely all are hearing a lot about, by James Cowan and by none other than Tech legend Kevin Jones. What are you hearing about each? I know one is going to be really kind of geared towards the academic success, right?
Yeah, what I'll say about all 3 of these, these NIL, companies is that Brent Pry, one of his priorities when he came in as head coach at Virginia Tech was to make sure that this was built out, right? Because, I think Virginia Tech was a little bit behind the 8 ball on the NIL stuff. Last year it was kind of a weird year. You're coming off of COVID, right? It's your kind of the first year. Everybody's trying to get their feet back under them anyway, right? From a COVID standpoint. But then on top of it, you have this new NIL legislation that passes, and now players can make money off their name, image, likeness. And I feel like a lot of schools were ready from the get-go, right? It's almost like they were anticipating it. I feel like Virginia Tech was behind the 8 ball a little bit. And they're not alone, right? A lot of schools were kind of caught a little bit flat-footed by it because I think everybody knew NIL was coming but didn't know when, and to make matters even more complicated, Justin Fuente was a lame duck head coach last year. That's what he was, right? It was a tough schedule. Burmeister at quarterback. We talked about last year when I was on, like, to go into the fall with having only one real option at quarterback, and he hasn't really been healthy his entire career leading up to that. It's like, that is a strategy that gets you fired, right? So yes. He was a lame duck head coach, and it's really, really hard to get players excited about NIL and everything that comes along with it when your coach is on the way out. You're not sure if you're going to be at Virginia Tech long term. That's something you have to think about for some of Virginia Tech's main players, and it's kind of played out that way, right? Like a lot of Virginia Tech's guys who were major contributors last year and have been major contributors over the last few years are gone, right? And we'll get into the NFL draft guys later, but a lot of guys transferred, a lot of guys left. Tavion, leaving for Kentucky is a huge loss, right? And Trey Turner going to the NFL, we kind of knew last year was going to be his last year. Raheem Blackshear choosing to, instead of sticking around, he goes to the league. James Mitchell, blows his knee out, and he's like, you know what, I'm not sticking around for a new coaching staff. I'm on my way out too. So a lot of guys, kind of saw the writing on the wall to begin with. And then I just think Virginia Tech is in a much better spot now from an NIL standpoint, even before you get into the specifics of each. they're in a much better spot now with NIL, with Brent Pryce, the head coach, because there's all this energy around the program anyway. Now you introduce the NIL firms that are going to be kind of working, with Virginia Tech as like a partner, even though the school can't facilitate deals per se. We all know how college football works, that they'll find a way.
Yeah.
Every school does. Let's call it
Absolutely.
what it is. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see kind of how all this plays out, because I know on the basketball side, we saw what Justin Mutz was able to do with Tech Sideline, and that's just scratching the surface, right?
Yep.
So it's going to be really interesting to see kind of what happens from here on out with NIL.
Yeah, it seemed like Virginia Tech, I know you talked about being behind the eight ball. They did a decent job of kind of setting up things to help players build their own brand, but there wasn't a whole lot of push with outside entities to get the ball moving to help facilitate some of those deals and really use it as a recruiting tool for Virginia Tech.
Agree. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was one thing I will give Justin Fuente and his staff credit for, in the athletic department too. They were like, all right, we're making sure these guys kind of understand what this NIL legislation means. How do I build my brand as a player? The coaching staff, to their credit, last year when this NIL stuff kind of went into effect, they were like, all right, we're going to try to get these players, thinking the right way about NIL. But as far as like outside influences, marketing firms, stuff like that, there wasn't really much of that. Now you can't really put too much of it on Fuente himself. Like, everybody loves to blame Fuente and the old coaching staff and all that, but like, that's kind of like a hard thing to pin on them. Yeah. But from a lame duck head coach standpoint, and from a players being like, I don't know if I'm going to be here or not, it's really hard to get things really rolling with your star players when you're really not sure if they're going to stick around, right? So that's the way I've been thinking about this anyway. So I think now moving forward, Tech knows who's going to be in the building, coming out of spring. There's going to be more transfers, but coming out of spring, you kind of know who's going to be around for the fall, and I think you can really get the ball rolling on that.
Yeah, and you also got to think about the NIL companies not assured of who's the head coach, and then obviously, it's going to happen because we're going to talk about him. Knowing Justin Fuente's personality, how many wanted to buy in to that as being the head coach? Like, he's the face of the program from a coaching side. How are we supposed to craft these deals when if he won't kind of maybe go to bat for his players and help them push? So why are we going to go ahead and invest potentially millions of dollars in giving deals out when, like you guys have already mentioned, we don't know who's going to be here? Let's just wait. If he has a great season, awesome. He's still going to be here, but they're going to come off a winning season. If he gets fired, hopefully we get somebody we can work with.
Right. Like, how excited is Kevin Jones to launch an NIL venture with Justin Fuente as the head coach? I mean, only Kevin Jones knows the answer to that, right? But
we could guess.
We have a good guess.
Right. But we have a pretty good guess. I mean, look at how many players were in Blacksburg, former players, right, were in Blacksburg for the spring game versus how many former players came around when Fuente was the coach. And, we can all do the math here. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something to take into consideration. It's just like the persona of the two coaches and kind of where Virginia Tech is from a public-facing standpoint with their football program now with Brent Pryce versus where they were with Fuente. And, we'll have to see what the product's going to be on the field year over year and whether or not Pryce can win enough games to stick around long-term. But as far as like the PR standpoint and, facing with alumni and improving alumni relations, I mean, this has been a home run hire from that standpoint so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, while we're on that point, let's go ahead and talk about some of the player and the alumni stuff that was kind of going on over the weekend. Let's lead off with the Monogram Club golf tournament in Roanoke. Some pretty big star power turned out for that one.
It was crazy, man. It was crazy to see all the former players. See Shane Graham decked out in his like old school like Payne Stewart golf attire.
Yeah. His knickers.
It's crazy, man. It was cool seeing all the pictures come out of that too, right? Like getting, all these guys back into Blacksburg. Shout out Davon Morgan. I know he had a big hand in all the events this weekend in Blacksburg. But again, like perfect example, like how much of this was going on during past spring games, right? And the last couple of years have been a wash, obviously, with COVID. But even prior to that, we did not see this type of excitement around the football program, even when the wins were plenty, right, in the first couple of years of the Fuente regime. So really, really cool to see the Monogram Club golf tournament. And by the way, really nice course there, Roanoke. Had the pleasure of playing that in the past. Very, very nice course. So a cool venue to get guys excited about getting back to Blacksburg, getting the alums all together, on Friday, before spring game, and, getting them back in the building, I think is really important, and making them feel like they're wanted around the program. And, for the players, former players, to organize that too, right? And alums to, by the way, like alums who are coaching elsewhere, you know what I mean? And they're all coming into town, and they're like, oh, they got NFL offseason programs starting, right? Like current players.
Yep.
Like we got camp starting, mini camp starting next week. Now we're good. We're going to Blacksburg this weekend. I mean,
that's right.
Taking time, it says a lot, right, about kind of the attitude that these players have, towards the program, and the energy that's around Blacksburg right now. It's very cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you had Davon Morgan putting this together while he's coaching over at Henry. Yeah. And he's doing that. You got Tyrod coming down on the heels of camp starting. I mean, it's insane the coordination and just the enthusiasm that the former players are having since this regime has changed. It seems just like night and day. I don't know whether it is. I think there's a difference between we saying we want you here and then actively doing things to try to get people here. And I feel like that's the difference. Like, I don't, being iced out is one thing, but when you feel like actively wanted, like we're trying to get you here, we want you here, and we're expressing that actively. That's what seems the difference to me. It's not just like, oh, well, if you come, you come. No, we're trying to get these guys here because it helps our brand, it helps them, it gives them a good time, and it gives us a way to show what Blacksburg's all about.
Absolutely. And the other piece is the activity on social media with that golf tournament. You had VT football, some of obviously the videographers went out there with them. The players were posting pictures of each other, and also. And it's like, well, what does that do? Well, these guys, someone like Tyrod has a crazy amount of followers, and the kids out there start seeing this and start like, oh, I didn't know Cam Chancellor went to Virginia Tech. Right. I didn't know the Pullers went to Virginia Tech. It's like brand building. It's like, it might, is it going to be a decision, the decision of why a kid comes to Tech? No, but it starts making kids realize that a lot of good NFL players have come through here, and now you're having this new regime who's really pushing, like, being active on social media. And speaking of being active on social media, the Spring Jam Friday night, I mean, that looked like a lot of fun. And once again, same way, videographers there, pictures going.
Shout out Jordan Long.
Shout out Jordan Long.
Video was sick, right? Yeah.
But it was like everybody just got back together, didn't miss a beat, and it was, all eras, right? It was all eras of Hokie football. Even guys who were from the last regime were there. The Beamer guys, the Dooley guys, on back through the 70s and the 60s, and that tells you something of the importance it is to those guys when they're not iced out and they're invited. They're gonna come and they're gonna give a hand.
Yeah, I mean, again, shout out to the former players, right? Shout out to Billy Ray, Pat Grayson for, connecting with those guys and, helping sponsor that event. It looked unbelievable. I was not in Blacksburg last weekend, but from all the pictures and videos coming out of everything, right? It just seemed incredible. And to have all these former players and the enthusiasm around the program. I mean, you thought there were a lot of former players at the golf tournament. There were even more at the Spring Jam, right? Yep. A lot of guys were getting into town Friday afternoon, didn't make it to the golf tournament, ended up at Spring Jam Friday night. You had people partying in Blacksburg until really late and taking pictures with fans, and all the players being so hospitable with their time too. I mean, you got legends, right? People who have had really impressive careers or are having really impressive careers at the next level. And guys, in Davon Morgan's case, right? Guys who coach elsewhere that, just want to be in Blacksburg around Virginia Tech. It's really cool. And then, to kind of go into Saturday and see the players taking pictures with the recruits, and it goes to your point, Curtis, where it's like all these former players don't really necessarily remember that, Rock Carmichael went to Virginia Tech, and
I don't.
that you got all these guys, Cam Chancellor, and, everybody knows Tyrod, but
Yeah.
you can just go down the list of all these guys who had really, really solid NFL careers, and they're like, man, I didn't realize he went there.
Exactly.
And you got all these 17, 18-year-olds who are in town over the weekend taking pictures with these NFL legends. And, you think about the time frame when they were growing up, like that's who these guys were watching on TV at the professional level. Didn't even realize they went to Virginia Tech. So
exactly,
that part of it is definitely a big deal for sure. And have Spring Jam and Monogram Club with the golf tournament and all that. I mean, it's a huge deal.
Well, and the big deal of having what the players committee was what Wyatt Teller, Shane, Chuck, and the Fullers talking to the recruits.
Yeah.
You look at that. Shane's the oldest. Shane's retired. Wyatt's one of the best guards in the league. Kendall's is a legitimate. Him and his brother both really good cornerbacks. Chuck's one of the better safeties in the league. And again, it's the good ideas like let the people who played here sell the program.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if it's a Brent Pry thing or just someone saying, why aren't these guys talking to these kids about it?
Well, we're taking the layups finally. Like these are layups. These are things that should have always been there.
That's what I'm saying. Like, why make things more difficult than you have to, right? Like Fuente, why aren't you saying what's up to the 99 team when they're in Blacksburg, and you're playing Duke? Like, I understand I know what the outcome of the game was. We don't need to get into that. But, like, again, like, take the layups, right? Like, you got this team in town, the best team in Virginia Tech history. It could be argued with some of those late 2000s teams I know. But the team that made it to the national championship game, right? Yeah. And had Vic and all these guys, and they're in town, and they're celebrating the 20th anniversary. It's a layup, right? Like, take the layups. Have your players, your former players, speak to what this program is. Because it's one thing to have a coach, right, or a coaching staff recruit a kid and be like, hey, come to my school. They're getting that pitch from 20. If they're good, they're getting that pitch from 20 or 30 different schools, right? Yep. And they're sifting through all these scholarship offers. And at some point, all the coaches, I feel like, blend in, unless you're like Saban, right? All the coaches are blending in. All these coaches, especially with some of the schools Virginia Tech is competing against for, a lot of these kids. You're going up against, you're still getting 4-star kids, but you're going up against Penn State. You're going up against UNC, right? You're not necessarily going up against Bama, Clemson, Georgia. Like, it's not necessarily those types of recruiting battles for Virginia Tech. So you get a lot of these coaches that blend in, man. And why not just have these former players that can probably relate to these kids a bit more because they've been in their shoes before, right? Versus the coaching staff that's saying, come to my school, come to my school, come to my school. They're hearing that all over the place. They're hearing that all over the country. So have your former players speak to what a special place Virginia Tech is. And the fact that Fuente and his staff didn't take better advantage of that is baffling to me, because it's so easy to bring kids in and then have them stick around when they are speaking to people they can relate to. And it's not even just like the coaching staff. I've heard the argument with like, oh, Fuente's from, Oklahoma and Texas. He can't relate to Virginia kids. Yeah, that's true. But even beyond that, like, he's not bringing people in who can relate to the kids he's recruiting. Yeah. Guys who have been there and done that with the program, that can not only relate to what it's like to playing in Blacksburg, but are maybe from Virginia or from the nearby area and can talk about, oh yeah, I went to Virginia Tech. This is what my experience was like. Yeah. Fuente didn't have former players do some of the recruiting for him, and they're not on payroll. Like, it's easy. Just bring them into town and have the recruits in and have them have this experience where they can kind of see themselves in the shoes of these former players, where it's like, oh, maybe my experience will be like that too. And he just didn't take advantage of that. Pry's been on campus 20 minutes. I get Virginia Tech has one guy committed, right, in the 2023 class. I get that right now. And that's a concern that some fans have, that, more people haven't jumped in the boat yet. But if you look at just kind of the outside momentum that's around the program, the energy around the program right now, it's palpably different from what Virginia Tech had under Justin Fuente. It just is. And we won't see the fruits of that, I don't think, for a couple years, because they kind of came in late. You got to reestablish relationships and all that. But like, you can feel the energy around the program right now. It's different. And Tech hasn't had this in a long, long time. Even going back to Beamer, they did not have this for a while. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that's what's
10 years.
cool about kind of where things are at right now, even though we can all acknowledge, like, at least in 2022, like this fall is going to be a bit of a rebuild.
Yep.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be a struggle in the fall. I mean, I think favorably we have
One of
as
the worst
easy of a
schedules.
schedule as we could potentially have for a
Right.
first year head coach.
Right.
Yes.
Based on the overall caliber of opponent and the amount of travel they have to do. October's still going to be a bitch because
Right.
the way
Always
those teams
is.
are stacked. The way those teams are stacked in October, that's going to be a bitch. But if you can come out of that stretch, 500 or close to it, you feel pretty good that
Yeah.
you're gonna at least make a bowl in year one.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens in the fall, obviously, but that's going to be interesting. But you talked about the vibes and the different feeling that we have.
You were there,
so
man.
far since Pride taking it, but
You were
let's
there.
talk. Let's talk about Saturday. So I'll
were
talk a
there.
little bit about the vibes themselves,
Yeah.
man. Tailgating. It kind of felt like an early season, like non-conference FCS type game atmosphere. Like it was almost like a fall atmosphere in the spring, and that was something that I haven't really experienced at a spring game, the ones I've ever been to. It was just a different vibe. It was kind of those early season. You have the hope still in the season. You haven't had a loss yet. You got an opponent you feel like you're gonna beat up on a little bit, and there really wasn't the negativity I feel like has been around. The pregame atmosphere that we felt before. We went downtown a little bit. Downtown's always fun, but it just there's just something different about the energy right now. I know I put it on Twitter. It feels like most of the fan base is finally rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I wasn't in Blacksburg last weekend, but it's not hard to go on social media anyway and get like the small sample size of the fan and just see that finally it feels like a lot of people are rowing in the same direction, man. The Fuente era was very polarizing because, when Tech wasn't playing well, it was like, yeah, let's fire this guy. And I've written, you guys know I wrote several articles about that. I'm like, you guys got to fire him. But every early part of the fall, Tech rattles off a big win. They beat a North Carolina, and now all of a sudden I'm like, you guys are sucking me back in, right? It was just like this polarizing thing. It's like every week I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. Like, you're sucking me back in. Now we're beating Carolina. Carolina's a 6-win team. We didn't know that at the jump. We knew they were an 11-win team.
We knew they weren't going to be what they were ranked as, but we didn't know they were going to be just any other team.
Right. I mean, when people are saying they're 11 or 12-win team, they're playoff good. I'm like, what are we? No. What did we watch in 2020? Right? Like, what were we doing? I mean, they went 8-4 and losing to Virginia, to UVA, and they're losing to a bad Florida State team. I'm like, are we watching the same thing? Like, how are they a top 5 team in the country?
And they lost pretty much all their offensive production other than their quarterback.
It made no sense.
4 NFL players. You don't lose 4 NFL players and are 10 spots better than you were the previous year.
It didn't make any. It made no sense to me. I'm like, yeah, they returned Howell, but you got no skill position talent coming back. Anyway, the thing
that's the fuck UNC section.
Yeah, exactly. No, right. we gotta slide that in there, right? But yeah, I mean, you can just see the vibes are different with the fan base now, right? Like everybody's like, all right, not sure if we want Brent Pry or not, right? This was like initially the day it happens, right? Everybody's like, Brent Pry. I thought we were getting Charles Huff. I thought we were getting Matt Campbell. It's like every 20 minutes I heard something different. And then Brent Pry kind of comes out of nowhere. And, early on, Brent Pry was like a rumored candidate, right? Like very early on, you'd like have your list of like 10 or 15 guys. You're like, yeah, Penn State's defensive coordinator. He's on there somewhere, but towards the bottom, right? And then you hear all these other guys. And then lo and behold, like out of nowhere, okay, Brent Pry's going to be the guy. And like Pete Thamel from Yahoo, now ESPN, he breaks it, right? And we're like, all right, Pete Thamel, once he says it, it's happening, right?
Yep.
And he breaks it, and the reaction from the fan base, much like the hire of Mike Young for basketball, it was mixed. It was like first year head coach, but he's done some good things as a coordinator. So, and he's got Virginia Tech connections, and we're getting back to our roots a little bit, right?
Yep.
And that's what it felt like for me.
Well, this podcast will always stand up and say we called him a dark horse when we did the episode back in November. We called him a dark horse.
You did.
But then when you start reading more and more and knowing he was here during the foundation in the mid-90s, it like that makes sense. And he's got the ties to Beamer. He's recruited the state of – he almost understands the footprint because of being at Penn State. They're a very footprint-oriented recruiting territory.
Yeah.
It was like everything started stacking up, and it was just like this makes a lot more sense now. But I think a lot of people thought because he had been a DC for so long with James, it was just kind of like he's there.
It's the Brent Venables argument. It's the Bud Foster argument. It's like are these guys ever going to be a head coach anywhere? And then here he comes, right? Here he comes to Blacksburg. And you knew like at the press conference that this was the right hire for Virginia Tech right now, right? Regardless of whatever happens, right? Wins, losses, whatever. We needed a program reset. Yep. And regardless of how the tenure goes from like a wins and losses standpoint, I think we can all acknowledge that the culture that Pry's going to instill at Virginia Tech is kind of back to our roots, right? Because we just kind of lost our way a bit with Fuente, certainly, right? And that's putting it lightly. But I think we're kind of back to our roots and kind of what made Virginia Tech successful for the last like 25 years, leading up to Fuente. It's like this is a hire that really kind of makes sense, understands Blacksburg, understands Virginia. It just feels like a more logical hire.
Yeah, I feel like the latter years of Beamer, in some ways, the culture that was built kind of got stale or neglected. And then when Fuente came in, nothing was ever established to really replace that.
It was a hard job, man. It's not like, I mean, people like to say, oh yeah, he stepped into a perfect situation. I mean, Fuente, I know some fans, people have thought they think I'm a Fuente apologist, but like he did not come into a perfect situation. He made it look really good year one and even year two, quite frankly. But it was not a perfect situation. And, I know Fuente had the dalliance with Baylor. Everybody talks about the dalliance with Baylor, right? He's, we talked to Baylor and going to leave. And Fuente had that press conference later on, and he was like, yeah, you hired me. You didn't hire me for the first few years. You hired me for like right now, right? And he's talking about the actual rebuild that needed to take place. And it never turned out well because he had no real plan, it seemed like. But he was right. I mean, he was correct. Like,
his assessment was correct. He just did not have the prescription.
Yeah, right. Like he's not a dumb guy. Like I think people will be like, yeah, Fuente's an idiot. I think he's thrown into a situation with Virginia Tech that he was not ready for.
No.
And he was he rose fast, right? And really good success as an offense coordinator, strong couple of years at Memphis, and then he steps in and everybody's like, yeah, he's ready for a P5 role. It's like, man, we knew pretty quickly with the recruiting. It was like, man, this is not Memphis. Like you gotta recruit differently here.
Well, the biggest issue with him was it's like he did come into a good situation roster wise. We did things built.
Yes.
But it felt like what he could not do and what separates P5 from G5 is usually when you start seeing guys bleep up.
Right.
P5 coaches, they don't last long. They're like, gone. You're gone. You're gone. You're gone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's normally what happens. And the thing is, we didn't see that. We didn't see the turnover we needed to see because normally there's a slight flaw. P5 coaches are narcissistic, controlled egomaniacs.
Mm-hmm.
You're fired and you're fired. And they don't care. But I also think for him was he had a playbook laid in front of him. And instead of sitting there really reviewing that playbook of what had happened the 20 years before, he's kind of glanced at it and threw it to the side.
I'm doing things my way.
I'm doing things my way
so far.
Last piece, compared this, but I'm going to get into one more piece, and we're going to actually get to the spring game. Is I've seen this said over and over. It seems like to that staff, maybe not to all of them, but to a lot of members of that staff, this was just a job.
Mm-hmm.
Where this new staff, how they're recruiting, how they're getting out in the community, how they're showing it, how they're going down the cheetah wings down at PKs, how they're hitting, different localities and how they're doing and making sure it's known. It's like you said with the culture. These guys say, this is the culture. This is what we have to show. And that's why it's working. And they also just instilled, I think, something that should never change. The 3.2 run. Right. And literally before the spring game, getting all the players to line up and basically give high fives to the people coming out of the
They get it, man.
It's brilliant. You're going to have people who would never run that 3.2 miler next year say, I want to do that. That looks really cool.
Right. No, I agree. The roster was really good for the roster was great for Fuente, right? You can't step into a better situation roster wise, but
he was a quarterback away from a great roster.
Right.
And he brought that one player in.
Exactly. And like everything else, it was like, man, we know those facilities need to be upgraded. But it's almost like Fuente, it took him a few years, right? He was like, man, maybe we don't have the best facilities on the planet. And, I've kind of maintained this take that I have that Fuente fans are going to look back at the Fuente to Baylor thing. And a lot of fans, like in hindsight, were like, yeah, I wish he left. But in hindsight, I think a lot of fans are going to look at it and say, you know what, Fuente interviewing with Baylor and then going back to Wick Babcock and saying, this is what I need is going to be one of the greatest things that's ever happened to Virginia Tech football. I am, you can't talk me off of that take, like, because immediately they're like, oh, fundraising. Oh, we got the funds. Okay. Now new locker room, new nutrition, right? They're doing all these upgrades, new meeting rooms, everything. And now they're not hiding the meeting rooms anymore. Billy Ray's talked about that, right, on Saturday podcast. They're not hiding the meeting rooms anymore from recruits, right?
Yeah.
They bring them. We're not embarrassed about our facilities anymore. Not that Virginia Tech had the worst facilities on the planet. They did. There are way worse facilities in Virginia Tech before the upgrades. But now everything's great, right?
Yep.
Everything looks really good. And the locker room, the weight room, all that stuff's getting upgraded. And, you just see the energy now, right? Because now you got a new coach and you got all these facilities show off and you see the momentum and how much the coaches care, right? Curtis, to your point.
Yeah, they care.
It's a big deal, man.
It's
a huge deal for sure.
Yeah, and I'll say this. When you talk about the recruiting, it used to be on those recruiting trips, a lot of things stayed behind a curtain, and then there was like, we'll show you here, but we're not going to go over here. That's not exactly putting us in the best light. So now it's like, more or less you can take the recruits everywhere. You show them the meeting rooms, you can show them the players' lounge. I mean, the locker room isn't. So the problem with the locker room is it's not that it's bad. It's just that compared to pretty much every other ACC, and especially if you
don't go ACC. No, don't go ACC. They're like, we're like ninth. There's some pretty bad locker rooms.
There are bad ones, but I'm saying is back nine where we want to be in the ACC?
They top 35 team in the country. Top 35 teams in the country. And what's going to happen is we're about to get into the top 15 in the locker room business.
Right.
Very soon.
Again, right. I said, it's water slide money, not cabana money, but water slide's good enough.
That is.
I think everybody will settle for the water slide. I think.
Exactly. All right, well, let's get to the spring game. We have talked 30 minutes on the vibes and
this is what happens, man. I get on here, I just run my mouth. That's what happens.
This is awesome. This is why we love having you on, Mike. But let's get to the spring game itself, and let's take a look at the teams. The white team was definitely missing some players. I don't doubt that one bit. But, I mean, the maroon team definitely had an advantage. I mean, they had the Sam, the Mike, and the Will starting linebackers, Armani, and Dorian, along with what? Fuga
and Garbett.
Yeah, Fuga and Garbett, yep.
Brent Price said he didn't stack the teams. He stacked the teams.
I mean, I'll tell you.
CJ McCray was also on the maroon team, and he's like the two deep.
I'll tell you what Pry did. probably feels good about a lot of positions on this roster, and those positions were playing for the Maroon team. Like it's as simple as that to me. And you have some outliers, right, with Pollard, for example, right? But like there are guys that he feels really, really good about, players that he feels really, really good about certain positions. He's like, you know what? I want to see what they look like. I want to have 70% of my starters here, 70% of my starters there. That's what was apparent to me, right? As I was kind of, watching the game on Saturday and just kind of taking a look at the rosters and trying to get myself up to speed as quickly as possible with who was playing where and for who and all, because it's hard on TV,
It's super hard
all that going on. But
can we get an all 22 doing this?
Right?
All 22, or even just tweet out the rosters before the game starts,
right,
so we can get like
because we're basically like, oh, I think that's DeJuan Lofton. Oh, I think that's Jaden Blue. Oh, so and then when you hear him make a play, you're like, all right, confirmed. All right, I got that down. So you're just trying to figure things out, on the fly. But that was my take. That was my major takeaway. It's like I think Pry feels good about a handful of positions on the roster. I think obviously a linebacking core is one of them. I think, his starting corners, I think he knows, regardless of what he says about quarterback, I think it's clear Wells is the guy, right? We'll get into that. But I think he feels pretty good about where he's at with certain positions on the roster. And then I think there are other positions that he probably feels pretty good about that maybe I don't feel so good about. So we can talk about that too. But interesting.
We're going to hit all the positions here tonight. And you already mentioned it. Let's start quarterbacks, because we didn't name a starter, but I think from the look of it, Wells is firmly in control. Brown has a rough day, but it looked like with Wells, he felt comfortable out there making the passes. He did almost throw a couple picks, but to me, Jason Brown is going to have a heroic fall camp to overtake Grant Wells. Do y'all agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I was there. I felt the same way. I think Brown was a little bit hamstrung with the offensive line draw that he had. But sometimes even when he had time, I don't know if it was just, being antsy because of how little time he had on other plays. But he was, a couple of overthrows here and there, even when he had a little bit of time there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Blue had one drop of a good scramble throw he had. I think it was midway through the second quarter there. That could have extended a drive on a third down. But I mean, overall, just not a great day for Brown, and I'd say a pretty darn good day for Wells. He had one throw to, I forget who it was. It was a little bit behind, almost got picked off. Another one,
Jaden Blue, maybe.
No. Blue was on white.
Oh, Blue was on white. No, maybe it was might have been Lofton.
That was Lofton. Yeah, I think it was Lofton.
He wait for a score, maybe
a little behind him, and I think Murray almost picked it off.
Yep.
But I mean, other than that, I mean, he did a good job of it being in rhythm, throwing on time.
Yeah.
A couple good deep balls to Caleb Smith. So not a whole lot to critique. Bad other than, like I said, be a little bit more accurate on that square end to Lofton there.
maybe a little more touch on some of his throws, right? I mean, he did complete those two deep balls to Caleb Smith, but I watched Grant Wells throw, and I'm like, man, this guy loves to throw at 90 miles per hour. Is like the vibe I got. But Tech hasn't had a quarterback with a live arm like that in a while, right? I mean, Hooker, I guess, but he kept getting banged up, and then the offensive line was up and down, and he had some struggles there. But yeah, Grant Wells was really, really impressive, and you can just tell he's got more natural talent than Jason Brown. I mean, Jason Brown's had a really nice college career, kind of where he's jumped around, had a nice career at St. Francis, and then transfers. Down to South Carolina and plays well, and then, ends up here back in Blacksburg at his dream school, right? This is kind of where he's always wanted to be, and kind of he's going to be able to wrap up his career, whether he plays a lot or not. He's going to end up in a place where he's always wanted to be. It's a really cool story. But you look at Grant Wells and what he was able to do at Marshall, and now, transferring into Tech, and man, he's got the skill, right? I mean, you see it. The ball jumps out of his hand. It doesn't jump out of Jason Brown's hand, right? No. It's just different, and I agree, Brian, like definitely the offensive line did not do Jason Brown any favors, right? Definitely didn't. I think he was seeing ghosts a bit there. In parts of the second quarter, especially, he looked really, really uncomfortable back there.
Yep.
And like you said, got happy feet, missed a couple throws they probably could have made or should have made if he's standing behind a more competent offensive line. But he was never really comfortable back there. And I put some of that on Jason Brown. I put a lot of it on the offensive line. I'm trying to be cautious regarding kind of what we saw there last Saturday, because you can only take so much of it with a grain of salt. The fact that it's a scrimmage and the fact that, you're playing with a bunch of second and third string offensive linemen for most of the game, that does play a factor, certainly for any quarterback. But Grant Wells looked really, really good. You mentioned the 2 throws to Caleb Smith. I know we'll get into the receiving core here in a minute, but, Caleb Smith just physically looks like a different football player, which a welcome sight to Virginia Tech fans who, Tech's looking for a true number 1 receiver now, with Tavion gone and Trey moving on and no James Mitchell. They're looking for a number 1 target. And Caleb Smith's a good candidate, man, if he looks like that this fall and he can stay healthy.
It's true. I'll tell you something else I noticed. And there's 2 things. First of all, both Brown and Wells showed some athletic ability when they pulled to run the ball. I know they weren't live,
right?
But if anything, they looked decisive. Like when they ran a read, they pulled and they took that step and went. Which, if you're not a 4.5 guy and you're 4.6, 4.7, being decisive is going to help you get the extra yards. The other pieces, and this was for both of them, where they missed. When they missed throws, they missed correctly. Me and Brian talked about this a couple days ago. It was a slight overthrow. It was to the right side of the shoulder where it could not be picked. I give Brad a ton of credit because we hadn't seen that in the last few years. We hadn't seen, no, you need to throw the ball. Here's the angle you have to throw it at. Your guy can get it. They can. And that's huge.
Hey, Curtis, giving a guy named Brad a bunch of credit is something we have not been doing in Blacksburg the last few years. So we'll say that.
We'll get Brad
coach at that.
Name that Brad, right?
Exactly. Now the other pieces. Let's talk a little bit about Taj and Devin. They both showed they are super athletic guys, both with some big runs. Devin 0 for 1 in passes. Taj, I think 1 for 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
Are we just going to be – these guys are probably going to be battling in the fall, and whoever's not the practice squad quarterback is probably going to transfer out come.
Yeah. If we're
maybe Farrell hangs around and moves to receiver or something.
Yeah. I think if we're being honest with ourselves, I think Taj Bullock's in a spot where he could be looking elsewhere. I came from a really good program in Jersey, right? Like came from a really, really good high school football program. I don't want to throw shade. Taj Bullock's an athletic kid, but he was raw coming in as a passer. He was the most athletic guy on the field in high school. His tape showed that. He was not the most proficient passer, on the field. They played a really good football program. So, taking a chance on him, especially in a class where, you're hoping to have a guy like Demetrius Davis, right? And you're like, all right, we're moving on to Taj Bullock. It's like, all right, that's not Demetrius Davis, but now he's playing at UTSA. I think he got.
Oh no. South Alabama. He's in FCS now.
I saw something on Twitter. Yesterday about how he got like a UTSA crystal ball. I was like, huh? Like, what?
That was it, and then he committed to South Alabama.
That's wild.
So,
he somehow outdid himself there. But going from point being, you're going from Davis to Bullock, right? And Bullock's in this spot where you're like, all right, Tech needs to develop a young quarterback behind whoever ends up being the quarterback after all these transfers happen. Is kind of where we were at the time. And he comes in last year, and when he didn't get playing time under Fuente in a lame duck year when all your quarterbacks were bad, that's when I knew. I was like, man, Bullock really must not be ready. That was the kind of the indication for me. And a lot of people were talking about, bring it, throw him in the game. Let's see what he's got. Man, Tech's quarterbacks that Fuente and company thought were capable were not playing very well. And now you think a true freshman getting thrown into the fire when he's a raw passer, you think that's going to work too? And look, we weren't crazy, right? Because now Brent Pry comes in and he said right away it's going to be a wide open quarterback competition, and before you know it, Bullock is buried on the depth chart, and it's like, all right, well, maybe this isn't going to work out here. So, what we'll see, right? We'll obviously see what happens, but I mean, it's pretty clear who the 1 and 2 are going to be this year, in whatever order they end up being. I think we think it's going to be Wells and then Brown, but I mean, I think Bullock is likely a transfer candidate.
Bullock's got a lot of time. He has less position flexibility, and
Correct.
he's going to at least be sitting behind the presumptive starter for 3 years.
The less flexibility is the huge thing, right? Because Farrell, I think, is more of an athlete. You can kind of slide all over the place. Like, if Bullock's not playing quarterback, I don't know where he's playing. So
that should be defense, maybe. Defense, right. I don't know.
Maybe.
Hey, Brent Pry will move people like that at the whim of a hat. Like,
let's move guys all over the place.
Yeah, they. I mean, he came in. He said he thought he looked like a defensive end. Maybe he's moving to DN. I can't believe nobody made the elite academic institution joke with the DD stuff there. So
missed an opportunity.
Sorry, I had to throw it in there.
I feel like it's played out now. All right, let's flip over to the running back room. Obviously, we did not have Malachi Thomas. He got banged last week in the blue jersey. Brian actually got to meet. Son got a picture with Malachi. Brian, tell Mike what you felt like you saw from just being around him just for a couple minutes.
I mean, he looks bigger than he did last year. I mean, I know when he got in the games a lot last year, we noted, okay, well, he looks good running the ball, but he needs to get in the gym. Like, skinny legs, a little bit skinny arm. Looks like he's got a little bit more definition, a little bit more size on him now. Hopefully, he can take a little bit more of those, carries in a game, because he's probably going to be that guy that's going to get you about 15 carries a game this year. Looking at what they've done historically with games that Bowen has called, he likes to get guys touches. Usually 2 to 3 guys are going to get over 10 carries, but if we can get Malachi in that 15 carry range every game, and then have Holston or somebody else getting 10 or 12 a game, that's probably going to be the way to go. But if he can get that 15 carry a game for us, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, I mean, Malachi was so good last year, second half of the year, when the season's spiraling out of control. It was like, all right, man, this is the one bright spot, right? It's like, it's really cool to see him kind of develop, see a freshman get in and play significant snaps and be able to, play as well as he did. But that was always a concern. It was like, man, he's got to put some weight on. And realistically, he wasn't ready to play from like a build standpoint, right? And that's really good to hear. He's put on weight. I mean, I'm not surprised when looking at Caleb Smith in pads. I'm like, all right, I think these guys have been hitting the weight room. They look a little bit better. Yes, I mean, Tech in the running back room, they got to figure things out here. I mean, I know, Brunson transferred out yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess yesterday.
Already at Miami, Ohio. Already got a place.
Landed. He announces he's transferring at like 9 and then has his new school at 11. So I think that's been planned out for a little bit.
Yeah. That's been in the works. There's a reason he didn't get any carries on Saturday.
He didn't get carries. Lee didn't get carries.
Lee was on the field. He just didn't get any touches.
Yeah.
I mean, Christian got minimal. I mean, it's kind of the writings on the wall with what's going on in the running back room. Hampton got a couple good runs.
Yeah, he had that one good run where he kind of broke it outside, got about 10 or 15 yards.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the way it's looking on in the fall with Malachi, you mentioned Holston. Black and King have their roles, right? They both can catch the ball. They both have return ability. I mean, it's kind of the writing on the wall, right? Who got carries? One's already out the door. One looks like he's in the doghouse. I mean, the question is, when do they go into the portal? Because, I mean, unless they just want to stay here, unless they love the culture, which,
I think what you're going to see too is, and we've already started to see it with, guys switching positions and Pry moving some guys around. And, I think there's a decent chance you see, no pun intended, decent chance you see Chance like in the slot, playing some receiver, which, I mean, they were talking about that with Fuente, right? They were saying, okay, but, just looking at his high school film, it was like this guy can line up everywhere. And I think Pry's acknowledged that, and I think they're going to try to get Chance Black in some different opportunities, both at receiver, at running back, because I mean, I see what Fuente was doing, getting 12 or 13 running backs, like, step ahead of everybody else, just get as many guys as you can, and then
figure it out later.
Yeah. No idea what he was doing. But now you're in a spot where you got to get the roster back down to, a manner that makes sense. And yeah, I do think the writing's on the wall, right? And I was really excited about Kenji Christian as a prospect, but I'm not sure he's going to be playing football in Blacksburg, Yeah, and I do think the writing's on the wall. I mean, I think Holston sticking around, throws a wrench into Kenji Christian's snaps, I think, a little bit, because now you don't have like that big body back that can step in, right? And you're like, all right, that may be a natural fit for Kenji Christian. Now Holston's back, and Keyshawn King, that everybody thought was going to transfer out when, all the roster attrition when Pry came in and King stuck around. Okay, so now it's like, all right, we know King has talent. If the coaching staff likes him, he'll figure it out. And then you got Malachi Thomas. We saw what he did in limited snaps. And then you have Chance Black. You have Bryce Duke, obviously, that the coaching staff's really, really excited about. They've been talking about him at length in the offseason. So there are certainly some guys that are going to have some opportunities here. And I think the guys who got carries on Saturday and the guys who stuck around in the recruiting class with Brent Pry and stayed in the boat, like those are the guys in the running back room who are going to have, maybe a little bit higher priority, for the staff than some of these other guys that maybe we were excited about, like Kenji Christian or Marco Lee, right? Or a Brunson or Hampton. Like, I think that's kind of where we're going to be at here.
Yeah. And I mean, when we look at the combination of Thomas, Christian, and Black, I mean, you saw the thought process, at least in bringing those three guys in one class, because they really kind of, Thomas the more all around back, Kenji kind of the between the tackles specialist, and then you had Chance Black that kind of do a little bit of everything, and especially help you in the passing game. There was at least a thought process there with these three could be kind of that three-headed monster in 2 to 3 years. But with where we are, I think in the process, and as you said, with Holston coming back, I think that kind of threw a wrench in where Christian is, on top of whatever else, maybe behind him not getting as many touches and kind of falling behind in the depth chart there. But it's going to be interesting because we have, I think Hampton might be the one that sticks around of that 20 and 21 class group of running backs. He seemed like he was comfortable in what the offense was doing, and if he's willing to bide his time a little bit, there might be a role for him in a year or two.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you see a Holston leave, you see maybe a Chance Black move to receiver, then all of a sudden before you know it, you're on like the 2 or 3 deep. And if you're on the 3 deep, like you mentioned, Brian, earlier, if you're on a 3 deep at running back for Tyler Bowen's offense, you're getting snaps. Like, you're playing. So really, I mean, I don't think any of these guys realistically are looking at it as like, oh, I'm the starting running back, because Bowen's going to use all of them. And if you're in the 2 or 3 deep, you're going to have a real opportunity to get on the field.
Absolutely. Now, as many questions as we have about the running back room and, people not playing, who's leaving, who's not, I think Saturday, the wide receiver room kind of came to light. We saw, Caleb Smith obviously have a great game. Like you said, he looks physically more impressive. Jaden Blue had a drop. Again, a little hindered probably by, the offensive line. But I know Brian mentioned just watching him run routes. His routes are solid. They're crisp.
I mean, he was open a few times, just there wasn't time to get him the ball.
It wasn't there.
He still made a couple catches in the game. So, I mean,
yeah,
played well, just, not as many opportunities I think we wanted to give him.
Obviously, Dwayne Lofton, that shocked me. And Brian, that catch he made was out of Y. That was not a slot catch that he made, that big one, which, they've been mentioning, they've been moving him around. Seeing him play that, he's going to get on the field more. And then the last two, Jalen Jones out of Richmond here with the big catch. And then Brian again. Brian loves Dallin Wright. Brian's loved Dallin Wright since the first time he looked at his tape. He focused on him Saturday, similar to Blue, right? Similar to Blue. Looked good in his routes, was missed a few times.
He was open. He was wide open a couple times. Just there were overthrows. He did have, I think, one or two catches on the day. So, he looked good.
Dallin Wright's a damn white whale. Like, he's on the roster, but does he really exist, right? He's around there somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the assessment. To be honest with you guys, like, I was so amped to see Lofton and Jalen Jones go on the field last year. And then all of a sudden, like, here comes Lofton getting a little bit more playing time. Then towards the end of the year, it was like, oh, Jones, we're really excited about Jalen Jones. That's all, the staff talked about. Then Jones pulled a hamstring or whatever it was. He was out a little while and then didn't really get on the field till later in the year. Mm-hmm. But not obviously as many meaningful snaps as Lofton. But I think now you look at, those two in particular, and that's the future of the wide receiver position at Virginia Tech. And they're going to be playing significant snaps this fall. And that's really exciting, I think, for Virginia Tech fans because, we can talk about Caleb Smith and how good he's looked physically. And I think, obviously he's going to have a major role. We can talk about Jaden Blue, but he's a grad transfer, right? But when you're talking about the true, future of the position, it's Lofton and Jones. And it's been Lofton and Jones. Yeah. And I think to see them, have an opportunity this fall to blossom into a bigger role as Virginia Tech kind of moves forward and the roster continues to improve. I think a few years from now when these guys are seniors, there's going to be a real opportunity for them to be part of a really, really good offense at Virginia Tech and for them to be kind of the focal points of that. So we're going to have an opportunity here, both last year and kind of lame duck year. And then during this rebuild here where we're going to see, some young guys really start to blossom and turn into really, really good 4-year players for Virginia Tech as long as they stick around.
Yeah, I was really excited to see Jones show out. He had that big juke on Connor where he was able to take that quick hitter and get about 15 yards out of it. Had one other good catch. I mean, there was a lot of promise from the young guys, and that definitely bodes well for the, as you said, for the future, not just looking at 2022. So that was big. Seeing at least a little bit of what Connor Blumrick's role might be in this offense.
Very vanilla on Saturday. Very vanilla. They're hiding him.
Yeah, they're just a couple quick hitters, just getting the ball to him out of the backfield. Nothing really to show yet. But
I am so excited to see him play this ball.
They lined him up everywhere though, so I think once they actually make him a focal point, I think we'll see what he can do in that. What do you think about the tight ends? We didn't really see a lot of different looks with them in terms of getting them the ball, but
yeah, I mean it's really hard to go from the excitement of having James Mitchell being your starting tight end and then being Nick Gallo's always been that guy who it's oh yeah, I remember he's on the team. He makes one big catch. You're yeah, hell yeah, Nick Gallo. We got two really good tight ends. You're just trying to talk yourself into it. And it's cool though, right? Because you see Gallo playing significant snaps. You see him getting these awards from the coaches and talking about how good of a spring he's had. Tech's going to need somebody in that tight end room to step up. Gallo's the most logical guy, right? And because everybody talks about, what's Connor Blumrick's position going to be? It's Connor Blumrick's going to be Connor Blumrick.
He's an OW. Right. He's an OW. He is an offensive weapon that is, like Brian said, everywhere. He's going to be everywhere on the field, and that's good for Gallo. Right. That's good for all the wide receivers. It's good for the running backs that every week with Blumrick going out there, teams are going to have to find him because if you put the wrong guy on Blumrick and get him the ball quick, if you put the wrong linebacker, he can make him miss and get down the field. If you put a corner on him and that corner can't make a sure tackle, he's going to put him in the dirt because of having the size advantage.
Yeah.
So he's going to help everybody in the long run.
Yeah, I know David Cunningham. First of all, he did a great job with you guys a couple weeks back. That podcast was incredible. But he was tweeting out some news and notes and was taking some pictures and video from a few of Tech's practices and talking about how good Connor Blumrick looked at receiver. Yeah. It's you got these guys who are seasoned receivers who have, Caleb Smith, who, doesn't drop anything really, for being honest, right? Catches everything. And, you're watching these guys in line, and for these reporters to be talking about Connor Blumrick and saying he looks like any of the other receivers, when in reality he was just playing quarterback all last year and was playing like H-back essentially at A&M after Kellen Mond beat him out.
Yeah.
Like that's encouraging. It's like and the way I look at
that's another offensive weapon that we didn't have last year.
Right? I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, we saw in the bowl game, you know, one of the few bright spots in Connor Blumrick in the bowl game is like we at least saw his athletic ability a little bit. It was like nothing's really going well, but you know he's athletic and he tries hard, right?
Yeah.
And I see him as more of like a utility guy in baseball, where he's playing like 5 or 6 days a week, and you know he's kind of just giving everybody else a break. Like that's kind of how I see Connor Blumrick's role. Like he's going to be on the field a ton, and one snap he's going to be lined up at outside receiver, and you know Caleb Smith's going to be off the field, and then another snap he's going to be in the slot, and like Lofton's going to be off the field, and like I could see him jumping around. Maybe he's lining up in the backfield. Like Bowen's going to line him up all over the place, and I think he's going to give everybody a break.
What he does well, it's going to be so good because it's going to give us that formation flexibility in like the hurry up no huddle situations, because you can do a lot of different things with Connor Blumrick on the field, because you can line him up at slot, you can split him out, he can be the middle guy in trips, he can be in line, he can be tight end wing, he can really do all those things and even line up outside. And you don't have to sub. You can just keep going. If you got the defense on the ropes, just keep pushing it and still give them a lot of different looks.
And like I think in theory, like Fuente staff wanted James Mitchell to be that guy, and they wanted like Dalton Keene to be that guy, and they like wanted these guys to kind of line up everywhere. They really wanted Raheem Blackshear to be that guy, and then you know either he didn't stay healthy or they just didn't utilize him like they should, right? And I think Blumrick really has an opportunity because of his unique size and speed and athleticism. I just think it's kind of like a different mold where he really can line up anywhere.
He really can. All right, somewhere he can't line up is the offensive line. And Brian, this is your baby. We're an offensive line podcast. I'm going to let you tell me what you saw out there Saturday, actually in person, which I know, as we know, being that close to the field as you were, you get to see certain things you can't see on TV.
Yeah, and I mean, being an offensive lineman, when I was watching the game live, I was mostly paying attention to the offensive line when I was watching it live the first time. So that's just who I am. I thought the four starters, like the presumptive starters, the presumptive first team that actually played since Clements wasn't out there, he was banged up. I thought they looked fine. I think probably the weakest would have been Jesse Hansen. I mean, he had some good plays, some bad plays, but I think overall the guys that we think are going to be that front line had a pretty good spring game. I think the problem is that we have seen that based on the performance, especially on the white side, that you know we don't. I'm not sure we've got more than 5 or 6 guys that we can count on at this point. And I think that's where we're going to run into some problems. I will say, of the non-presumptive starters, I thought Jack Holyfield looked pretty good at guard.
Damn encouraging sign. That's encouraging. That was a position switch, right? At least coming out of high school, we're like, where is he actually? It wasn't like formally a pride position switch, but like coming out of high school, we were like, all right, Jack, where are you playing? You playing tight end? You playing offensive line? What are you doing? Offensive line's a huge concern for me, guys. Huge concern.
It is.
And we'll talk about defensive line in a bit, but I'm worried about us in the trenches. And I'm not talking about the starters. I'm talking about kind of the rotation. And you know, you get 3 or 4 games into the season, you got guys banged up, and who you turn into. Like that's my concern. And
there's mostly at tackle.
Yeah,
I mean. And Brian, I know you've talked about this at length on this podcast, but you know you can cover up some stuff on the interior offensive line. You can't cover up offensive tackle when they're out on an island. It's just really, especially left tackle with the quarterbacks we have in this offense, and it's going to be a concern.
You can help out a right tackle from time to time with scheme and things like that.
Right,
left tackle is going to be hard to cover, and right now we have 2 that I feel okay about.
Yeah.
And behind that is going to be rough.
It's a concern. Yeah, it's definitely a concern. I mean, offensive line was a concern going into last year too a bit. And I mean, the way I look at this is that there is a portal out there.
There
maybe
is.
we can find a guy or two, to come in that we know has played, meaningful snaps elsewhere. Like last year, Johnny Jordan was that guy who,
Yeah.
we knew if Brock Hoffman went down, maybe Johnny Jordan could step in and play because he was a all Big Ten honorable mention at Maryland. And we're like, all right, you can step in and play. I thought he would get more snaps than he did last year. But maybe we can go find a guy like that in the portal, this summer. I think that's especially a tackle. Like that's somewhere where I think Brent Pry and his staff really need to hit hard, because there's nothing I really saw out of the white team on the offensive line that really gave me a whole lot of confidence that
None.
we're going to be in a decent spot.
None. The only thing is, Brian mentioned to me the other day, he thought Schick could probably kick in and be solid at guard, but we are definitely going to be. We have to go after the portal with a tackle. I mean, they have to attack it. They have to hopefully. The hope is you find someone that's a sophomore or redshirt sophomore and come in to get multiple years of eligibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing you really want, you want to get a guy that you can either plug and play in the starting lineup, or you want to get a guy that can at least be that solid backup, whether it's on the left side or the right side. Or, like I said, if you ever get a frontline guy, you can do one of two things. You can either have Clements you kind of groom him to be the left tackle in waiting for next year, or you can go ahead and plug whoever that addition is at left tackle and slide Silas down to guard, which gives you a little bit of stronger line across the board.
Well, I think a lot of us thought last year, like, that's where the Johnny Jordan example comes in, right? Because I think a lot of us thought last year, okay, we're bringing in an all Big Ten honorable mention offensive lineman. Naturally, he's going to come in because Christian Darrisaw left, right? Went to the NFL. We all thought, okay, naturally, Johnny Jordan's going to come in and Brock Hoffman's going to bump to guard. And now all of a sudden we feel pretty good about where things are at on the offensive line. We'll try to cover up right tackle. That was kind of what we were talking about after flipping Tanu to the left. Yep. And it didn't really pan out that way, right? Because Caden Moore developed into a really nice player, which, I mean, we're all happy about that now because he's got a full year of experience and he's going to step in. And I think we all have pretty high expectations for him, going into this year. But I agree, like finding a guy like that who could step in, be a starter right away. You can plug and play, right? Who comes in from another program where it doesn't necessarily need to be, a P5. It could be a G5 program. That's fine, but just find somebody who's had meaningful snaps and has played, good football somewhere. I think that's really important for this roster. It would be great if it was a tackle because I am concerned about offensive tackle, but that's my that's my biggest area of concern is this offensive line, without a doubt, on the entire roster.
Yeah, I do. I put it as the number one concern.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get into the defensive side of the ball, guys, we are going to take a quick pause for a message from our digital partners.
As we take a quick break, we'd like to tell you about getting your free website report from our digital partner, Grassroots Digital Marketing Studio. They'll tell you how your website ranks on Google, on-site SEO, and social media. No commitment to buy anything. You can get your free report by visiting grassrootsdigitalstudio.com/free-website-report. Now back to the episode.
All right, back to the defensive side of the ball here. And let's start with the linebacker unit. And I told Brian this, I think I texted you Sunday, Brian. That unit looks the best across the board. I mean, starters, 2 deep, even some of the 3 deep guys look legit. And we all thought about Sam. Oh, man, we're all worried about Sam. Keontae Jenkins is going to be a hell of a Sam this year.
Yeah, I mean, out the gate, he looked pretty good. He was making some plays. We saw Kelly Lawson get in there and play well at that position as well.
As did JR.
And as you said, the unit looked good across the board. I think we have, legitimately a solid 2 deep there. When you have, Dax and Tiz coming off the field, you're not as worried as you were maybe last year at this time, especially at the backer position. And Artis looked well again. Hopefully, Coach Price talked about his, becoming more of a vocal leader on that defense. If that comes along and you've got, 2 legitimate leaders like Dax and Keyshawn on that defense, that's going to be big for that unit. and they look better. Like the coaching is obvious. Like there wasn't at times last year and even the year before that. Sometimes our linebackers looked lost, and I know they were going against a vanilla game plan and all that, but I didn't see a time where our linebackers looked lost in this one.
Mm-mm.
I mean, this is what happens when you get a defensive coordinator, and we all love Justin Hamilton, right? I don't want to slander Justin Hamilton. Great guy, always really nice to me. No slander for Justin Hamilton allowed here. With that being said, this is what happens when you have a defensively minded head coach who's been a major P5 defensive coordinator somewhere else and knows what it's supposed to look like. Justin Hamilton did an article with Mike Barber with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and great article. Go check it out. One of the things he said was that when he came into Virginia Tech and he started ascending into his role, the one thing he knew is that he didn't know how other P5s were being run. He said that in that article with Mike Barber in that interview, right? So this is what we're seeing on the field now in the spring. We're seeing guys being utilized in positions they were not necessarily being utilized in a year ago. You're seeing guys more comfortable in their role, and it's only the spring. Like, that's the biggest takeaway for me. Like, they're moving guys around, position changes. You got guys moving on the interior defensive line. You got Gunnar Givens playing defensive tackle. You got all these linebackers. Now we got 2 or 3 deep at positions that we were a little bit concerned about maybe before. And like you mentioned, Brian, Virginia Tech's in a position now where you're not feeling quite as bad if a Dax Hollifield comes off the field, right? Or an Alan Tisdale comes off the field. Like, all of a sudden we're like, all right, I think we're okay with the guys we have in there right now. We didn't feel that way last year, right? And you're in a spot now where I think guys and their talents and their skill sets are going to be better utilized. And that's just the beauty of having a guy who's kind of been there and done that in a major P5 program. Because Chris Marv's going to come in, right? And he's the defensive coordinator. This is Brent Pry's defense for the first few years. Like, we all kind of know what that is. And that's why I really like the Chris Marv hire. Because you bring him in, have him recruit, have him get comfortable. He's played for Pry. He's coached under Pry. He knows the scheme. And now he gets to be groomed with Pry as the head coach. Like, this is a perfect scenario for all involved. And I think the defensive players and kind of their new positions, I think they're really going to benefit from that.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, they get to bring Marv along. And in the meantime, by all accounts, one of the better position coaches in terms of just technique and coaching the position. So
also,
I think go ahead.
What you mentioned about P5, I mean, Marv has seen now Vanderbilt, he's seen Mississippi State, and he's seen FSU, and he's about 6 or 7 years younger than Justin Hamilton. So when you say Ham mentioned, I've never seen a P5 program, this is a guy that's seen multiple, and he's only been a coach about 6 years. So that room, I think, if you asked me, I feel that's the room I would say I have no worries about anywhere. And I'll tell you, another room I feel pretty good about, even with the guy transitioning, is the safety room. Chamari, there was some growing pains Saturday, right? I don't think any of us will disagree with that. But just looking, I feel like he looked more natural. That's my opinion. I feel like he looked more natural playing back at the free safety, field safety, whatever you want to call it, spot, than he ever did at nickel.
You're not on an island as much.
Yeah.
No.
It's as simple as that with Shamari Connor. I mean, Shamari Connor's got a lot of Dietrich Bonner in him, where it's like, man, I love when he comes downhill and he's playing in the box, and I love the way he attacks running backs and receivers, like, in the open field after the catch. I don't love him in coverage, right? And you feel a little bit better about him in coverage when he's playing free safety versus the nickel, where he's on island all the time. We're all worried about his ability in coverage, which was, the real concern, I think, going into last year. And he ended up actually playing, I think, a lot better than a lot of us thought a year ago. But, like we talked about before, the concern with Shamari Connor has always been, how good is this guy going to be in pass coverage? And I think he's in a position now where, yes, he's still going to have to continue to improve in that category, but it doesn't have to be perfect anymore.
Yeah, I mean, he still has struggled here and there with missed tackles, and that's probably going to be something that he struggles with probably the rest of his career. I mean, at this point, if that hasn't been cleaned up, I don't know if it will, but I think that from the safety position, it fits his skill set better, and he's not going to have as many of those times where he has to be wide open in the open field against a Diami Brown or someone like that, where he's trying to make that type of play. Like I said, but I'm hoping that some of those tackling issues get cleaned up. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But Curtis, what you gonna say? You look like you got something you want to say on this one.
I'm just laughing here about the Dietrich Bonner thing. I mean, it's true. Right? If we go back to thinking about Dietrich, when Dietrich came downhill he was good. When you asked him to do other things, he was very scary. So that's what I'm laughing about. All right, I'm going to ask y'all before we get into any analysts or analytical pieces. Boundary safety. Hawk or Peoples? Brian, Hawk or Peoples?
I'm going to stick with Peoples. I'm going to go with I'm going to go with consistency. Yeah.
That's my answer too. It's okay. Peoples, man. Look, Peoples has been on the field more for a reason, right? And it's been the consistency that he brings, whether he's a spot starter or in the 2 deep, which is he's been a 2 deep player pretty much his whole career. It's a consistency. And I think with Hawkins, I think you're going to get more of like the boomer bust, like, oh my God, like that was great. Not sure Peoples makes that play, right? But at the same time, you'll be like, oh my God, I know for a fact Peoples makes that play. How did you miss that? Right? So I think the answer is Peoples. I think Pry's going to go with like the proven guy in year one. That's my feeling I have on it.
Do y'all think it's a camp battle, or is it one of these where Peoples is the starter, but there's going to be times Hawk just gives him a breather where maybe Hawk's getting 15 a game out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to still be I'm not saying they're going to, go 50-50 on reps here, but I think in terms of snaps, I think you'll probably see, Hawk still probably pull about, 30% of the snaps in a given game.
Okay.
Yeah, I think they're both going to play. I agree. I think push comes to shove. Like, if you need one guy on the field, I think it's going to be Peoples, but. I think they're both going to get some snaps. I think it'll be a camp battle for sure. My pick would be Peoples, and then I think Hawkins will get some snaps for sure. I think he'll play.
Again, I think we probably feel pretty good about the safety room. I know Jalen Stroman, won the special team award, so he's obviously making strides and becoming part of the 2 deep there. But I think I look next year. I think if this is projecting a year from now, we're talking. I think if People shows enough consistency, I think they're going to probably just simply move Peoples back. If he continues to build and shows consistency that he can do what they trust him doing what they do at boundary, they're just going to say, we're going to sit you back. We know Hawk can play here. We know we have to clean it up. But playing boundary, you make a mistake at boundary, it's not a big a deal because there are more guys around you. I think that's what they're aiming towards. All right, let's flip to corners. We hadn't heard Armani Chapman's name a lot until last week, but I think Saturday, him and Dorian Strong put their stamp that they are the top 2 corners at Virginia Tech this fall.
Yeah, no question. I think Dorian Strong needs to come out of that sophomore slump, though, right?
Oh, of course.
But those are the guys. Those are the guys. I think that was kind of etched in stone when we realized Waller wasn't coming back. I think it was pretty much set that it was going to be Chapman and Strong. It was a natural fit. Dorian Strong made so many great plays as a freshman, and then you saw him take some more chances last year, and I think that bit him a little bit. Really good player. You feel comfortable with Chapman. He's been around forever, right?
Yeah.
So, you want to talk about, consistency of Peoples and being like, yeah, he's been on the field more. He's got more experience. You're not going to find, short of Chamari Connor and Dax Hollifield, like you're not going to find many guys with and Ty Garbutt, I guess. You're not going to find many guys with the experience of Chapman. Like he's been around forever. So this is kind of his moment to step into a more permanent role, be less of a rotational piece of corner, and get in and kind of prove that he can be that guy, right? He can be a number one or however 1A, 2, whatever. Like he can be one of the top corners on the roster. And we've seen him as a guy with potential for years. And when he's played, he's been pretty decent. And now he's got a really big role. So let's see what that looks like with more snaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if he steps in as kind of that alpha dog in the cornerback room because, I feel like there's kind of a void there with Waller gone. I mean, Armani is definitely the elder statesman in terms of, being on the roster for this long, and just on top of the number of reps he's had and snaps he's played in games. So, I was a little disappointed in Breon Murray's performance in the spring game. I thought he was very, very up and down. He made a couple good plays on balls, but he got beat both on both of the deep balls to Smith. One I think looked like was man, the first one, and then the second was a cover 6, and he had the half field and just gave up too much depth too early, and Caleb beat him over the top. And I will props to Smith and to Wells on that though, because it was a skinny post. Smith kind of bent it back, made sure he stayed to the right of the right hash. Wells put it right where it needed to be, so Connor couldn't come over. So that was a good play overall, but Murray definitely the most inconsistent of the kind of the big 3 that we're expecting for that rotation.
It's a bummer with Murray too. You want to talk about guys who have stepped in, think about the bowl game a few years ago and how well he played. And it felt like every time he stepped in when, somebody was hurt or, somebody was out a few snaps or whatever, it felt like every time Murray stepped in, he was making a play. And, last year didn't play a ton. I know 20 was all screwed up because of COVID, but man, Murray's another guy who's been around forever, and I expected a better. It's one day. I don't want to take too much out of a scrimmage. But my takeaway was exactly the same, Brian. Like Murray's been around forever now. Like you gotta start making some plays, or at least like you mentioned on that cover 6 play, they got burned by Caleb Smith. Like a veteran should not be making that type of mistake against Caleb Smith, who's fast but not a burner, right? Like you can't be making those types of mistakes even in a scrimmage. So it's a killer.
It's the inconsistency. It's being here 3 years and still making the same mistakes you did when you stepped foot on campus. Right. Where Armani Chapman, give that guy credit. Brian praised of how consistent he was. He consistent every single play on Saturday.
Right.
And that's what you're looking for in the cornerback position. If you're consistent, you're gonna get beat. You're gonna have guys catch balls. But if you're consistent, 6 out of 10 times, they're not going to be thinking about coming to you because they know he's in good technique. He's on the right side of the shoulder. It's going to be tough to get the pass in there. We hit DJ Harvey. He got praised about how he's looked at the nickel. We've been mentioning, is he big enough to go play the outsides? And maybe that's why they're just talking about him being at nickel. I think between this or safety, I think this is a room, and Prime mentioned it, this is a room we go after. I think having Breon being older is definitely a good sell to someone with 2 to 3 years of eligibility left. Like saying, our 3's gone. If you come here, you have that potential. Heck, if you might have that potential this year if you can go beat him out.
Yeah, like our 3 is gone, and then even projecting forward, like you mentioned, guys with a couple years eligibility left, like Chapman's not going to be here too much longer, right? So you start looking kind of across the room. Dorian Strong has a really good year, and you just say, 2 out of 3 years that was really good. Had one year where I took a step back. I mean, you're basically running opposite of Caleb Farley, right? Where Farley had one really good game when he was a freshman. Outside of that, he wasn't very good. And then, he has a really good sophomore year, and he's like, all right, I'm sitting out the COVID year. And then he gets drafted really high. Yeah. Strong is a kid with a good size, and he can really run. And we've seen his ability in coverage. If he puts together a good year, does he make a jump? The answer is probably not. But I mean, I think you could sell it certainly if you're out there recruiting the portal.
Yeah, no doubt. I think, as you said, I think there's definitely some potential to get at least one, maybe two in the secondary altogether. I don't know if you want to get a fifth safety that feel like can be counted on for significant snaps. Behind the four we mentioned. But I think corner is definitely the more likely spot because you really do need a fourth that you can trust playing outside. And again, you talk about the sell. It's definitely a sell because, Murray's probably not going to be here after this year. Potentially Chapman's not going to be here after this year. And then even the potential with Strong, depending on, what output he puts this year. So it's going to be interesting to see who we target and how many we end up grabbing.
Absolutely. All right, guys, let's hit the last position group and probably the number 2 position group we're all worried about, and that's defensive line. The guys we know did fine, but I tell you, after like McCray, Pollard, Garbutt, Fuga, I mean, it was ugly.
I'm patiently waiting for more Cole Nelson. I'm patiently waiting for more Stretch Carroll. Right.
Well, Cole was out. Cole was hurt.
Right.
So we did not get to see him.
Right. But this fall, though, like projecting forward to the fall, like that's what I'm patiently waiting for. Right. It's like those guys to emerge. And I know Cole was hurt. Staff's been talking really highly of him. Right. Talking about, what kind of player he can be. And Fuente staff was high on him too. I thought that was a really big get when they recruited him. I thought he was I thought he was a bit under recruited. I thought he was a bit underrated on the recruiting trail. Really good size, really athletic player, has potential to be really good, I think. But yeah, Tech's going to need some production at defensive end in particular, right? You talk about offensive tackle, right? And the outside of the offensive line. Like I think Virginia Tech's weakness and the questions are at defensive end.
Yeah, who's going to be that other starter opposite Garbutt that's going to make some noise? Who's going to be somebody in the 2 deep that you can really rely on to go out there and give you, 3 or 4 quality series? And really beyond that, I mean, you want to have a solid 3 deep at the defensive line. Who are those, 5 and 6 guys going to be across that defensive line that can come in at defensive end and still get pressure on the quarterback and slow down the run?
For those who are wondering where the hell Mike just went, Mike's dog fell asleep in his kitchen, I think, and Mike's trying to get him to
snoring. He's literally snoring.
We can take
it on mute, like walking out of the shot. Yeah, that's what's going on. Yeah, that's what's going on. Yeah, he's been a little under the weather the last few days. Had a infection on his leg, and walking's been an issue and stuff. Like he's a 4-year-old golden retriever. He's fine. Just gotta give him some medicine. He'll pop right back up. But now the medicine makes him sleep real heavy. So
there we go.
My man is snoring.
He out.
That's great. But I think it's no doubt with this group as well is not. I don't even think possibility. I think it's a guarantee. And to me, I don't think it matters where we go, whether it's inside or outside or both. Yeah. And we've got to get stronger there. And I think what this goes back to, and this is where I will completely bust the old staff. We've talked about it. Complete roster mismanagement over the last 2 years. Complete roster mismanagement. It's why we had 9 running backs, but not enough linemen, or we had 2 tackles and 9 guards. I know, Brian, how many times would you be like, but it's another guard? Like
stop getting guys that were high school tackles that are you're going to move them to guard. Like, what the hell are you doing?
Right. I mean, you see him at one position at the high school level, and you're clearly recruiting him to another one at the college level. Like, stop recruiting the same guy over and over. That's all we saw.
It's true. Well, guys, that kind of wraps up the spring game, what we're seeing. Obviously, between now and really about 4 months from now, about 3 months from now, we expect to see movement and all that, because there are pieces missing on this team, but I also think with this coaching staff, a lot of these guys potentially they recruited 2 and 3 years ago might be looking for a new home. And luckily, that is where Brent Pry has relationships. That is where, like, Derek Jones has relationships, where it could be a kid they recruited in 2018, still have the good relationship with. Let's make a call. Let's see if we can get this kid to come. All right, I'm going to flip over. Let's talk about the draft real quick. Obviously, the Hokies have essentially 8, maybe 9 with Parker Rome if you count the kicker. Lasita Smith, Amari Barno, James Mitchell, Luke Tenuta, Jermaine Waller, our guest last week, Jordan Williams, Trey Turner, Raheem Blackshear. Let me get y'all's opinions. Who is the first Hokie taken in the 2022 NFL draft?
This would have been a layup if James Mitchell didn't blow out his knee.
Oh, yeah.
Damn layup. I'm gonna go with Waller.
Okay.
So if Barno had a really good year, it would have been like, all right, Barno, physical freak, right? Like can do a little bit of everything. And look, the pro scouts can still look at him that way, right? Because physical specimen, really athletic. But we've seen what Waller can be when he's healthy. Like we know he's capable of being one of the best corners in the ACC, which is like no slouch of a football conference, right? And really good receivers end up playing in the NFL out of the ACC, and Waller's strapping him up, when he's at his best. So my pick is Waller, although if James Mitchell didn't blow his knee out, I think we all know where this was heading, right? I mean, you're looking for a pass rusher, right? You're looking for a pass rusher, or you're looking for a dynamic playmaker on the outside. And Mitchell can be that, and Barno can be the pass rusher, but Waller is a lockdown corner that, I think at his best, you can still get him like round 3, round 4 potentially, because he's had this kind of up and down injury history. But his upside's really, really good. So I'm gonna go with Waller.
All right,
Curtis, can I hedge?
No, you can't.
Okay, so with that being said, if I can't hedge, I'm gonna go Lasita Smith. I think he's probably the most consistent, less volatile selection here because he's pretty much going to go where he's going to go. There's not that like, okay, well, he could go as early as early day 2, but he could also go as late as
end of 7,
middle to late of day 3. He doesn't have that big window. I feel like he's kind of pretty much locked in to a much smaller window. So that's why I'll go with him. But I'll say that to say this. Number one, I think Barno has the potential to go the highest just on his physical ability.
All right. I missed one person, by the way, Brock Hoffman. My bad.
Yeah.
Brock, but continue.
So I think Barno has the potential to go the highest just based on his physical traits. We've seen NFL teams in the past take a flyer on a physical freak. Think of Bruce Irvin with Seattle when that pick happened.
A flyer.
But everybody was killing him for it too. Remember, everybody was killing him for it, and he ended up being a pretty damn good player for him.
Pretty solid player.
Yeah, and so I think there's some potential there. Not necessarily as high as Bruce went, but I think you could see, potentially early day 2. For Barno, but you could see as late as late day 2, early day 3. There's a pretty big window, I think, for where he goes. And then you said Waller, and while I agree with you at his best, I don't know if at this point if he's going to get some of the Caleb Farley stigma of the injured Virginia Tech cornerback going into a draft type deal.
That's fair.
All right,
that's fair.
I like y'all sticking with your guys, but it's going to be Barno. And the reason is –
oh, yeah,
it's going to be Barno. He's going to be the first – for the reason is you can't teach the speed. And bringing him to the NFL, they're going to – somebody's just going to – like a wide 9. Me and Brian talked about our teams run a wide 9 very similar. I forgot. Who's your team, Mike?
I'm Pats fan.
You're a Pats fan. Okay. Yeah.
There's my Eli.
But there's going to be some team that runs a wide nine, like the Niners or the Colts or maybe the Jets, that are just going to say, we can mold him into being a all-around defensive end. But you know what we can do this first year? Get out on the nine, put your helmet directly at the quarterback, and run as fast as you can to him. And, you know, with a guy like him having that speed, I don't think a team will care. They'll just say, he's our pass rush specialist. We also see him, put him on special teams. He can go track somebody down. I will say this. I think James Mitchell, you talked about him being the lock. I think Mitchell's going to go higher because I think he tore his ACL at the perfect time. He tore his ACL at the perfect time where he's going to be getting right back into being able to participate in some of those camps. There's going to be someone around round 4 that's going to say, this guy's a skillful guy. He's probably really a top 50 player. We're going to get him about 150 or 120. We're going to take the risk because when we get to the mini camps in June, he's probably going to be just about ready to go.
Yeah, I think the thing Virginia Tech did poorly for him is that we didn't necessarily give Mitchell as much opportunity to show his skill set. At the same time, you know, he did show it in some areas. So and I think the NFL scouts see the ability. So the question is, they're going to say, well, I don't care what the tape says that they didn't get him involved in the offense as much as they should have. We're taking a flyer.
This is just what we do with tight end.
I will say this: of the 9 guys out there, I think 6 have a legitimate shot to get drafted. And I think all will wind up on a roster somewhere. I think 6, because some of them have position versatility and things like that. I think 6 of them are going to get drafted later rounds, obviously. You know, best of luck to all of them. Even though I'm sure we could probably sit here in 2 weeks and have an episode entitled, You Should Have Stayed in School.
I mean, I'll tell you what, man. Trey Turner running a 4.43 or whatever the hell he ran at the combine is going to help. I mean,
yeah.
You know, I have questions about what Trey Turner was as a freshman versus what he could have turned into and didn't. But I don't know if that says more about Trey Turner or more about the departed coaching staff. So, just felt like he was the same receiver his entire career. And I feel like what we saw when he was a freshman, we all thought he was going to be Isaiah Ford, Cam Phillips type receiver. And we all called him Big Play Trey, but he never really turned into that guy. And, you know, him running a really fast 40 at the combine, the fact that he catches everything, you know, he's not a guy who dropped a lot of balls, right? And, you know, I think he's got an opportunity to get drafted, whereas, like, going into the combine, I'm like, I don't know if Trey Turner is going to be a guy who's going to realistically be drafted. I felt like 6th or 7th round, maybe. Now I would be surprised if he didn't go, just given kind of how he's tested.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's kind of in that fringe area now, especially with his combine, and I think he did pretty good at his pro day as well. So yeah, I think he was at 2 pro days.
2 the
same day. Yeah,
2 of the same day. So
catching passes from Malik Willis. And could have been in Blacksburg. Screwed that up.
What do you know?
Yeah.
Has anything broken, boys, since we started an hour and 45 minutes ago?
I'm not seeing anything, man. I think we're good to call it.
All right. Well, we are going to wrap up this episode of the Boundary Corner podcast with our guest, Mike McDaniel. I'm Curtis Wilson.
I'm Brian Siegler.
Visit our website at boundarycornervt.com. Listen to all of our episodes. While you're there, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube account. We appreciate you guys really giving that a bump in the last couple months here, getting more followers there. Also, don't forget to subscribe to your favorite podcast source. We're on everything, Spotify, Amazon, and Apple. As always, we let our buddy Jason Long play us out. Catch him on Spotify and Apple Music. Definitely check out his new release, Old Man Yelling at the TV, which was released last Friday. So take a listen to that. And as always, we thank you for listening. And let's go.
Hokies!